Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Chairman Hochberg and Ratan Tata, Chairman of Tata Trusts.
Yeah, we got like we're on mic, so we're going to get started. You know, I feel bad. I said a few times earlier today that it was my last time to address you as president and chairman, so I lied. I'll be up here a few more times before the end of this conference. We have a really great special guest today to joining us. I've gotten to know Ratan Tata over the years. Whenever I visit India, I'm fortunate enough that he makes time out of his schedule and we have a private lunch. The two of us are able to talk about business, the global economy, Tata Enterprises, and so forth. So he has traveled here and is joining us for this morning. We're going to do just a short conversation. He's someone I hold in great affection, and I hope by the end of our 20 minutes you will feel the same way. So, you know, many people in our audience aren't that familiar with Tata Enterprises, and I think some of us perhaps first became more aware of it when Tata purchased Jaguar and Land Rover in 2008. So maybe you could give a little history and breadth of what Tata includes. And when we were sitting backstage, you know, one of the things that Tata has recently done is Starbucks. So maybe you could just give the audience a little sense of what Tata Enterprises includes today.
What they do today?
Yeah, well, what's the span of it? Because I know it's from hotels to automobiles to steel making.
Okay.
But I don't want to steal your thunder.
Basically, it's a group that has sales of about $100 billion US. The largest two companies are the steel company, manufacturing steel, about 19 million tons between the UK and India. Automobiles, we are the largest commercial vehicle manufacturer in the country, and more recently, Jaguar Land Rover. The most profitable company in the group are our software services, controversial to some extent in the US, but exceedingly profitable. Its largest market is the US and has about 90% of its business outside India. Then we're in hotels and Starbucks, as the chairman mentioned, and a series of small retail companies which are now looking at e-retailing as a means of getting away from the brick and mortar edifices that they have. We're looking very actively at the defense and aerospace area, which has just opened up in the country. We have just commenced a joint venture with Boeing, and we've been looking at assembling major components for Sikorsky and for Lockheed Martin. So that's broadly the gambit of about 60 to 70% of our total turnover is outside India, and mainly driven by software services and Jaguar Land Rover.
You know, when people describe you, they refer to you as an industrialist. And yet, it sounds like a lot of the business, as we talked a little bit, hotels, software services, technology. Is that a 20th century term, or is that still a good term to use?
More a Soviet term.
A Soviet term. Well, I don't think there's anything Soviet about $100 billion in sales. Let me ask you, one of the things that I have noticed on my visits to India and globally is the sort of integrity and ethos that is imbued in the whole Tata Enterprises. How did that evolve, and how do you sort of inculcate that into, how many employees are at Tata Enterprises now?
About 450,000.
450,000. So how do you create that culture and keep that culture going in that regard?
The culture was always there. From the enterprise was built on that kind of basis. But I accept that you can't vouch for the DNA of every single person that you have. We codified the ethos with great difficulty because no one could put their arms around it and define it. And we had all our employees read it and sign it. We had our directors do the same. And the view I have is that you can show your compliance or your commitment to value systems and ethics by how you deal with an errant employee when he veers away from this or does something that goes outside the sphere of that. And we have been, at least in my time, absolutely hard on it. Didn't matter who it was. If you broke the code, you left the company.
Just when we started, when you identified some of the key industries that Tata's into, we've read a lot lately about what's going on in Tata Steel in Britain. And that's challenging. Tata does steel in Britain and in India. Obviously, China is a large manufacturer, producer of steel. Do you have any sense of what that says about where steel can be produced? Whether there's a place for it in high labor cost countries? What does that say globally about that's a very vital ingredient for global growth?
If you look at the steel industry today, there's the raw material segment, iron ore, which is Australia, Brazil, to some extent India, etc. There's steel producers which tend to be close either to the raw material end or the market. And then there's the users of steel, which are automotive or whatever it may be. When we acquired Chorus, the plan was that we would produce low-cost slabs and ship them to Europe. On the other hand, Chorus, which was closer to Brazil than we were, would give us a new source of supply, and that we would be synergizing locations. That was at a time when China was building enormous steel capacity, which it was absorbing itself in its own growth. And I'm afraid no one in Europe saw the impact of what would happen if China started to dump steel on the world market. Nor did many people understand or appreciate the absolute effect of the collapse of the European economy and the problems relating to the euro. So for a couple of years after we acquired the English Steel Company, it was profitable. And then the bottom just opened up, and right now the problem is that the English facilities are underinvested, overmanned, and if we want to continue to be in that business, we have to really cut back on the size and scale of the operation and make them profitable. I don't think anybody could say it's impossible.
Right. But certainly challenging in
Certainly
market.
challenging, very challenging.
And I would imagine a Brexit might make that more challenging.
Pardon?
If Britain left the EU, would that make that even more challenging?
I wouldn't be able to comment on that, and you're not going to catch me in that.
I was just following Gillian Tett in the last panel. She was trying to get a few people to comment on Brexit. Let me ask you, when we look at global growth right now, 80% of the world's growth comes from three countries: India, the United States, and China, or account for 80% of global growth. So a lot is resting on India as three legs of that stool. We obviously have to get the rest of the world to start growing, but right now, the world is looking at those three countries to drive global growth. And when Prime Minister Modi came into office about just under 2 years ago, a lot of enthusiasm from the business community. At least when I was in India, so I'm not really there was a sense, it feels a little more muted, that enthusiasm. Is it just harder to turn that economy around? Because the world needs India to be thriving. How can you help us understand? Because we have a lot of people here who want to do business in India, and also as one of the three drivers of global growth, it's important what happens there. So how can we better understand what's going on?
I'll give you a little long-winded response. When Mr. Modi came in with the new government, it followed a government that had become dysfunctional in many ways. The last 4 or 5 years prior to the election had been quite lackluster and flat. Mr. Modi promised a new India, an India that was open. And many of us who've been through the opening up of India in '91 realized that India's potential, if you just made India operate on market forces rather than heavy regulation, responds very fast. You've got 1.4 billion people. You've got resources, and you've got a consuming public of about 600 million people, growing every day. So Mr. Modi promised this new India to take away some of the roadblocks that existed to investment and to make India more market-oriented. He marketed this new India very effectively outside India to the diaspora in the US and the UK, etc. But unfortunately, one hasn't seen in execution that much in the form of new reforms that would do what he said. One of the new areas that is talked about and could become very big is the defense and aerospace area, where he's been trying to attract people to come and do business. But people will not come to do business unless either they have a share of the Indian market. You can't disconnect those two, or that India is a very, very cost-effective place to do business. Neither of those two things are in place. So the potential to have growth and to have a very acceptable business base in India is very high. But if you were to say, have we seen progress on that area? I would say we've not seen the progress we should see or have expected to see.
Would that explain, because it appears that a number of Indian companies are still looking abroad versus investing in India right now? Is that part of what's that, or is that it? What one is that a correct trend I just identified, and is that maybe part of the reason you think?
It's the same thing. If it gets convoluted and your investment in India is delayed for one reason or another, corporates don't keep capital fallow for that period of time. They look somewhere else, either to manufacture because it's easier to do, or because the markets there are attractive.
Right.
And your assessment is correct. I think many companies have been looking at growth outside India, which is almost faster, or the possibility of doing it faster than it can be in India.
Which I only say since we're all looking, when I say we, the world is looking at India as, along with China and the U.S., is to drive global growth. We all have a lot at stake in making sure that India also is moving and those investments are happening. So do you see a path towards that in right now, or do you think it's still a little wait and see to see how these changes and reforms go forward?
It's very difficult to say whether India's embarked on this new India that Mr. Modi's promised, or is the country becoming very involved in a new ideology which it's tending to put in place. But the fact remains that I think the day you see 2 or 3 obvious reform measures taking place that are significant, and you'll see the economy jump
up. Right.
to that. And that's all it will take. Even if it's symbolic, if a bad and onerous tax regime, such as retrospective tax, were removed suddenly, I think you'd see a jump of confidence. If you saw some opening up for the private sector that didn't exist, either be banks, insurance, etc. Again, you would see a jump in the production levels and the GDP growth.
And is it just, reforms and changes are hard. I mentioned that this morning. Christine Lagarde was quoted in yesterday's FT. Is it just the resistance to those reforms is just that difficult right now?
It's not clear as to what is holding. First of all, what needs to be done is not precisely defined. I mentioned tax, but there are many other regulatory roadblocks that exist. And the conventional India in dealing with the government has often been, you have a policy, but to navigate through that policy becomes quite convoluted and time-consuming. And that has to be eliminated. More has to happen automatically. And then I think you would see a new India. There'd be some degree of abuse, which the regulation should deal with the abuse and not deal with making policy convoluted.
Right. Relating to this, surprisingly, in this controversy that has come up in the last week or so, the Panama Papers, and there was some in the Indian press how this has impacted a number of people in India who have been, if it's accurate, have been involved in this offshoring of money and investments. Obviously, people don't like to pay taxes, but it seems to have had a bigger play in India. Is there something in the laws or culture you think that it makes maybe this more prominent in India than some other places? Unfortunately, we see it in Russia, we see it in Malaysia. I was surprised to see it in India. So is there something culturally about, about not paying taxes, about avoiding the law that you think is endemic in the culture?
Well, the fabric of the country certainly has deteriorated in that sense. People have been evading taxes because income tax has been high, or excise duty, which is the main form of tax, has been high. There's no reason why that should happen. And I need to tell you something that perhaps should not be public, but I feel free to say this. When this Panama thing came up, I got a letter from one of the media saying that my name was there, and I thought, that's ridiculous. I've never been in Panama. I have nothing to do with Panama. And turned out, believe it or not, there was another Ratan Tata.
I thought they broke the mold.
And he doesn't live in India, and apparently there was his name. But there are a lot of people of prominence or celebrities that have been there, and I think this is more an issue of the same thing, catch the errant person, have an aura of over-control and command and control which existed in the past. So we need to get away from that. We need to create laws that are not attractive to go to Panama or Virgin Islands or such, and to do business in the country.
I agree. Let me ask one last question, because I think I see our time is up. So one thing I noticed a year ago, and that is that Tata Consulting Services, which is very large in the United States, is the sponsor of the New York Marathon. So a few people asked me, we want to know whether you're going to be running in the marathon in November, since you are the prime sponsor.
I'm not a runner.
You're not a runner.
I'm not a runner. And in my rundown condition, I don't know how many centimeters I would run, let alone kilometers.
Well, you have run a company that is respected and admired globally, both for its breadth, for its integrity, for the quality of its products and services. So you run a lot of things, if not the New York Marathon. So thank you for traveling all the way to join us this year. I really appreciate it, and appreciate having a chance to chat with you on stage. So thank you so much.
Brandon. Thank you so much. It wasn't so bad.
This is great.
Thank you.